In this video, you're going to learn in 15 minutes everything that you need to know to master your songs and get them ready for release. Hey everyone, Joe here. If you're already comfortable with your mixing abilities and you want to start to learn how to master your music to get it ready for release, or if you want to learn how to become a mastering engineer so that you can start mastering music for other artists, then this video is a great place to get started. When you first start learning mastering, it can be overwhelming. You're desperate to get your music out there and you just want it to sound great next to other commercial records. And it can be frustrating trying to get those levels to make it sound good next to other records without it crushing your mix, without it ruining the dynamics. But not to worry, we're going to take things step by step, start from the beginning. I'll explain everything as we go along, and by the end of this video you should have the basics, the knowledge to get your first masters finished. Now before we get started, a quick overview of how this is going to go. There are three parts. In part one, I'm going to explain exactly what the purpose of mastering is, what the aim is, and the difference between mixing and mastering. In part two, I'll explain how to approach a master. You'll be able to watch and listen as I master a track and show you what plugins and techniques you'll need to use. And in part three, you'll find out how to know when your master is finished and where to go from there. And once you've watched the video, of course, you want to try out what you've learnt. I urge you to master as many tracks as possible and really try and internalize these ideas so that they can become second nature to you when you're mastering on your own. So make sure you're listening on some good speakers or headphones, put your phone on silent, and get ready to learn how to master music. So what is mastering and what are we aiming for when we master a song? Mastering is the stage that comes after the mixing process and before a song is sent off for distribution to be released. It's where a fully mixed song, normally in the form of a stereo WAV file, is prepared for distribution. Normally the song will be made louder, there might be some tweaks to make it sound more punchy or more balanced depending on what the song needs, and it'll be referenced in multiple listening environments to ensure that it translates well for the listener. So it's a very different process to mixing, which is all about combining the individual elements of a song and getting them to work well with each other. Think of mixing like you're combining all the ingredients of a cake together in the right quantities and then baking it, and then mastering is like you're taking the cake out of the oven, icing it, boxing it up and getting it ready to be sold. And when mastering an EP or an album, considerations we made to keep that balance across the board for all the songs and get the right spread, the right spacing between the songs. In a commercial environment, often the mixing engineer and the mastering engineer will be a different person. This is because mastering does require a different skill set and often a different set of tools, and it's also just a good idea to get a second pair of ears on the record. For the purpose of this video though, you'll just be learning the basics of how to master yourself, how to get your own music out there without shelling out for a mastering engineer. So you know what mastering is, but what does it actually involve? What is the process? What are the tools that are needed? I'm going to give you a basic overview, and then in part two you'll see me put these steps into action. So first of all, the final mix is opened up in a brand new DAW session. At this stage, one or two reference tracks might be brought into the session as well, possibly another commercial track or a track from the artist's back catalogue to refer to throughout the process. The mix is listened to, normally with the mastering engineer focusing on the louder sections of the song, and some tweaks are made based on what the engineer feels the song needs. These tweaks are normally subtle, maybe some small EQ cuts or boosts, a small amount of compression to help balance the song further and maybe get some more loudness out of it. Possibly some harmonic saturation can be added, and the stereo imaging needs to be focused on as well, and some tweaks might be made there too. Fade-ins, fade-outs will be added if needed. An empty space will be added to the beginning and ends of songs to ensure the correct spacing. The track will also be put through a hard limiter. This is where we get the extra volume out of it, where we can push the level up with a ceiling to stop the audio from clipping. The target level that you'll be aiming for is going to depend on a few things, like the level of the rest of the album and the kind of genre. In part two, when you see the process, you'll see me aiming for a certain loudness and also taking into consideration the amount of dynamic range that we have remaining after we've sort of squashed things down a bit. Dynamic range being the difference between the quietest parts of the song and the loudest. Dither is also applied for when we're downsampling to CD, And finally, the song is bounced down into the correct format for distribution. So now that you know what mastering is and what you're aiming for when mastering, we're going to put this into practice. We're going to dive into a session and you'll see how to master your music and get it ready for distribution. Before we dive into the session and I show you the mastering process in action, I just want to add that the process does depend on what situation you're in, whether you're mastering a single or an album and so on. This tutorial shows you what you need to know to get your song sounding good, sounding loud and ready for the listener. So here we are in the mastering session. Before you get started, it's important to consider the artistic direction that you're going for with the master. What kind of song is it? What's the genre? And what kind of sound are you after? That's why it's really important to have reference tracks to compare to so you know you're on the right track. So to start things off, step one, I'm going to show you how I've got my Pro Tools DAW session set up for nice speedy workflow. It doesn't matter what DAW you're using, this will apply. So firstly, we've brought the mix in on a stereo track, and then we've got that going into a mix bus, which is then going into the master fader. Now the reason I've got it going into the mix bus, it means that we can put all the processing, the EQ, the compression, everything that we're doing on the track with the mix on itself, and then that's going through these extra sort of analytical tools like the Waves Analyzer and then through to the limiter itself. Then we've got a couple more tracks. It's 2 stereo audio tracks with our reference tracks on there so we can easily listen and compare loudness and the sound of the two. I'm just going to bring the level of these down because these are already mastered and my track up here isn't. We don't want to blow our heads off. And then step 2 is going to be the critical listening stage. You're going to listen to the entire thing. I won't on this video, but you're going to listen to your whole mix and really just think about what it needs. Obviously, it's going to need a bit of compression to smooth things out and limiting to bring the loudness up, but is there anything else it needs? Any subtle EQ moves or not so subtle if you think that's what it needs? Any harmonic saturation? Just make sort of mental notes comparing between our track and the reference. The track that we're working with today is called Reminiscing No More. It's by a band called Blind Fate. It's a progressive metal song, so we're going to be going for a nice loud punchy master comparative to these other tracks we've got here. Let's just have a quick listen on one of the loudest sections of the song. Okay, so just having a listen to that and comparing it with the reference track, it definitely needs some smoothing out, some balancing of the levels, and I think it needs a little bit more warmth, a little bit more meat in the low end when listening to it now against that reference track that the artist provided. Yeah, I think we're going to need a little bit more in the low end, and I think some harmonic saturation, some tape emulation might sound really great on this as well, based on the kind of music it is. So we're going to move on to part 3, which is the processing, where we're going to be adjusting the sound of our music. So to start things off, I am going to drop in the Kramer tape. It's a Waves plugin. If you don't have a tape emulation plugin, it doesn't matter. If you feel it needs a bit of saturation, you can always use some really, really subtle distortion, but you definitely don't want to go overboard with it. Less is more when it comes to mixing. But let's just have a listen to compare with it on and off. It's just brightening up a tiny bit and giving it a nice little bit of character that just works with this song. Then we're going to be moving on to compression. Again, we're going to keep things quite subtle. Start off with a 2-to-1 ratio. Just a couple of dB of gain reduction. We're not going too hard. We don't want to ruin the mix. And I'll bring that gain up so we can level match it to compare the two. Yeah, so it's just balancing out those levels. It will help us get more volume out of the track. And I'm going to be adjusting the attack and release. It doesn't sound bad where it is, but I just want to demonstrate if your attack is too fast, it can end up squashing those transients and ruining the mix. If it's too slow, then you're not going to be catching those transients. It's not going to be doing its job. And then the same with the release as well. If your release is too fast, it can tend to sound a little bit kind of bouncy and obvious when it's compressing. And then if you've got too slow of a release, it can really just squash the whole thing and you lose any sense of dynamic range. You can hear what I mean. If I bring that release sort of right up. Yeah, we still got the punch of that kick and snare. It's still sounding great. I'm going to go for a little bit of EQ now. I'm just going to be using Pro Tools stock EQ. You can use whichever one you're comfortable with. I'm going to be cutting out pretty much everything under around 30 hertz, that low end rumble sub bass that we don't need in there. I just want to give it a little bit more body in the low end. Just where the bass and kick are both sitting. A couple of dB. I'm going to take out a bit of that boxiness. Getting around 300-400. Yeah, it's sounding a bit closer to the reference track, which is what the artist wanted, without diverging from what we've achieved with the mix itself. At this stage, it's all about what the song needs. To me, I'm happy with how that sounds, but depending on how your mix came out, you might need to use some multiband compression, for example, which, if you're not sure, lets you compress different areas of the frequency spectrum. Can be very useful. But for now, I think that's all we need. I'm going to get this through a limiter. But first, I just want to check the mix in mono as well, because people do still listen in mono, and you just want to make sure nothing's missing. Yeah, so it sounds fine. Obviously not as great, but it's just worth checking. We're going to get the limiter out now. I'm going to use the Waves L1 Ultra Maximizer, but you can use any limiter as long as it has a hard ceiling that you can set. So what the ceiling does is, no matter how hard you push that level up, no matter how hard you bring the threshold down, which is going to increase the level, it won't go above this out ceiling. You'll see mastering engineers set ceilings of anything between minus 0.1 and minus 1. I want to be getting the most level out of this as possible, so I'm going to be putting it right up there at minus 0.1. I can also be setting the dither to 16-bit, because when we're bouncing to the CD, we're downsampling from this 24-bit session to a 16-bit file. And you need to be applying dither to prevent quantization errors, which can cause noise and unwanted artifacts. So let's play a loud part of the song. We've got our limiter here. I'm just going to adjust and push that level up. I'm also going to bring out the loudness meter. I'm aiming for a loudness, an overall loudness of around -8 integrated LUFS, which is a lot. That's loud, but that's pretty much what the reference tracks are reaching, so I want to get around that area. I'm going to be aiming for a dynamic range of around sort of 8 to 10. Again, it's not a huge dynamic range, that's quite squashed, but with metal music, that's sort of how it goes for that genre. But again, just going to be using our ears and make sure it still sounds great. It's much more important for your master to sound fantastic than for it to just sound really loud, because if you completely crush your master, then it's ruined. Whereas if it's a little bit too quiet or a little bit quieter than the song next to it, your listener can always turn it up and it will still sound great. Let's play around that area again and start bringing that level up. So we're achieving that -8, -9. Going to compare it to the reference track too. It's sounding really good. I could push it harder and get a little bit more loudness out of it, but I'm going to start getting a lot of gain reduction And well, you'll hear what it sounds like if we do too much. Just kind of horrible distortion, not enough dynamic range. It just sounds bad. So I'm going to keep it there. I'm just going to top and tail it. I usually leave about 1/5 of a second, 200 milliseconds just before the audio kicks in. At the end, I'm just going to listen to this fade. Yeah, nice and smooth. And then normally I leave about 3 seconds of silence at the end. So there we go. Let's move on to step 5. Just going to bring the loudness meter up so we can see what the loudness over the whole of the master is. We're mastering to a bit depth of 16-bit and a sample rate of 44.1 kilohertz, which is the standard for CD. So yeah, it looks like we've hit about -9, or exactly -9 LUFS, which is fine. It sounds great next to that reference master. It will be normalized for the streaming services anyway. And then we've got an average dynamic range of around 10 loudness units, which is not particularly dynamic, but it's not squashed either. And it's all about how it sounds at the end of the day. Now you've seen how to master a song. I'm going to move on to part 3 of this video, how to know when a master is done. When you're happy with the master on your main speakers, you're going to want to listen to it everywhere else as well. On headphones, earbuds, in your car, on your hi-fi, wherever you can, and listening with other songs next to it as well, sort of back catalogue tracks, other commercial records. Now, you're probably not going to be able to get your song sounding absolutely perfect, exactly what you want to hear on every single set of speakers, because they're so different, but it should sound consistent across the board and shouldn't bring up any glaring issues. And when you're starting out, it is important to master as many songs as you can. You don't want to be stewing over a single master for hours on hours, making a change every single time you listen on a different pair of speakers. It's best to just call it finished, start on a new master, and you'll start to notice improvement as you master more and more songs. So that's how to master your music and get it ready for release. Keep practicing, keep learning, and leave me a comment in the comment section below. What are you going to be mastering next? Or if there are any other issues, anything you're not quite sure about, just let me know and I'll help out. And hit that subscribe button to learn more about music production. Got a new video coming out every single week. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.